Freedom is the right to tell what they do not want to hear. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. Tired of the same repetitive government narratives? Then wave goodbye to the distractions and rhetoric of corporate media. For this is Anti-Media Radio.
But I want to get the language right.
The government is in trouble.
You're all a bunch of slaves! Bunch of slaves!
What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another.
What's your definition of media?
And now, here's your host, S.M. Gibson.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and this is Anti-Media Radio. It is October the 29th, 2015. So far, in this year alone, we have had 986 Americans killed by police officers. We have seen 103 officers die in the line of duty. 32 of those by gunfire, 39 of those by automobile accident. So the 103 is not all officers that were killed in the line of duty, but have just passed away. We've also seen America's great allies, Saudi Arabia, 141 executions so far this year. The majority of those by beheading. And the city of Chicago, with its strict gun laws, has seen 2,518 people shot so far and 426 homicides. Tonight we're joined by a special guest co-host, the editor in chief of the Fifth Column and journalist for Anti-Media, Mr. Justin King. Justin, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I can't complain. Running around here, had a little technical difficulties, but I think we got it sorted out now. So, there's a lot going on in the news right now. I guess before we get started here, there is a story that came out in the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. You actually wrote a response to the story. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that story and your response?
Well, basically, the story in the Star Tribune was that it inferred that Mint Press, Countercurrent News, Anti-Media, let's see, who else? There were a whole bunch of them.
InfoWars was actually on it.
Yeah, well, I have my own theory about InfoWars being on that list, but and basically it inferred that everybody got funding from some nefarious place, and the whole article was about Syria. The inference was definitely that we're all cashing checks from Assad.
I'd like to see that money.
Me too. I mean, that he's got oil money, man. Like, he could pay us like big time.
I haven't seen a dime of it.
Yeah, me either. But we can hope. So basically, the article was put out by a woman that runs a group that's pushing for regime change. Is basically what it boils down to. All of these outlets have been very against U.S. intervention, and there were little things that there are other little bits to the story that I believe the articles coming out from other outlets in the next few days will address. So I don't want to get into that, but there's a lot of personal drama involved in this as well that has nothing to do with me. I responded to it simply because the Fifth Column wasn't listed, so I figured that if we responded to it from there, it would be a little less of a conflict of interest. And then as I started writing it, I realized it didn't matter. I wrote for, I've got work on almost all of these sites. So.
And one of the reasons you gave that you kind of thought that the author didn't go after the Fifth Column was because y'all don't have a donation button. But Anti-Media doesn't either. And yet,
right, well,
still mentioned, so I don't know what her reasoning was for just picking that out of the air. She listed one of our articles that we had written, and the title of it was 81% of Syrians believe the United States was responsible for the creation of ISIS, or something like that.
I'm amazed by that number. I'm amazed. That's really low. I actually thought a lot more would believe that. But, yeah, no, as far as the donation thing, I noticed, because she kept talking about the anonymous funder at Mint Press, which was her main target.
Yeah.
And, I don't think Countercurrent News has one either. But, that, and by the fact that I think we were spared simply because we have a whole section devoted to Kurdistan. And Kurdistan, the Kurds are at war with Assad. So to her, it looked like we're on her side because we're more aggressively covering the Assad issues, the barrel bombs and stuff like that, most of which have stopped. But I think that was why we were spared the attack.
And the thing that I found interesting is the author appears to be an activist and for peace, and yet she's advocating, it seems like, for the United States to go in there and there be regime change, which, that wouldn't come peacefully.
Right. I think, and if I'm not mistaken, it was antiwar.com that referred to her little group as lefties with bombs. They apparently do have a very unique worldview, I guess. And then, of course, there was the ownership of the newspaper that published it, which was basically, it is what it is. It's owned by this billionaire. I mean, this is like the guy that owns...
He owns the Timberwolves, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Owns one of the professional sports teams, owns Taylor Corp, owns all these massive corporations, gives, hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Republican Party every year.
Wasn't he actually a state senator at one point? A Republican state senator?
Yes, he was. For Minnesota for like 10 years, I think. And that's the sad part, is that I don't even think that she understood that she was getting used. If anybody that looked at the article was like, wow, this is really horrible. However, it supported, the Republican Party stance, so they ran it and they used her. And I feel bad for her from that perspective, because she doesn't even understand that she got hosed. But at the same time, that was the attack, and the implications were pretty out there.
The amazing part, though, is it was just a story that she conjured up in her head. Basically saying, she listed all these, and to me, InfoWars, like, that was so ludicrous. It's like, so if Assad's funding InfoWars, that's basically saying that Assad 15 years ago had this plan to start this website, waiting for this day to come when he could use, like, it's crazy.
Right. And, I honestly, there's a part of me that believes that she included InfoWars simply as another way to discredit the outlets, because a lot of people do not view InfoWars favorably.
Right.
And anybody in a list with them, I actually remember the first time they republished one of my articles, and I remember going, oh man, like I really did. I got a nervous chill. I was like, oh God, because they have some, let's just say, unusual views sometimes. Stuff that I don't really co-sign.
They do.
So.
But, I think you're right. I think her article was definitely used as a propaganda piece, obviously. But it's just amazing to me that no one contacted me, no one contacted us, no one contacted anybody at Anti-Media to, discuss this, say, anything like that. They just ran it.
Well, that's your proof that it's propaganda.
Right.
You don't fact check propaganda, man.
And what's so amazing is they're sitting here bashing, and they keep using news in quotes, and yet they're supposedly a news outlet reporting something that they just made up, a story they just made up on top of their heads.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is.
The irony is unbelievable. It's more humorous than anything. And for anybody that is wondering, no, Anti-Media is not funded by Assad or funded by anyone else for that matter. But if you're looking to fund somebody, you can contact us at theantimedia.org.
I'm totally up for writing hit pieces for cash, but I haven't had anybody take me up on that offer yet.
No kidding. So there's a bunch going on in the news right now. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the newest Doctors Without Borders. I don't know why that's not getting really much play anywhere. Nobody's really talking about it. It's the second one in a month. This one happened in northwest Yemen. Happened at the beginning of the week. Doctors Without Borders bombed repeatedly. The Saudi coalition had the coordinates and knew exactly what they were bombed it anyway. Fairly similar to what happened in Afghanistan at the beginning of October.
Right. Well, it's the Saudis, and not to be, not to feed into American exceptionalism or anything, but I expect more of our troops than I do of the Saudis. I know the technology that we have versus the technology they have. They have the same planes, but they have the planes that are 20 years old. Mm-hmm. They have the older version. I can actually see them and how ill-trained their pilots are. I can see them making an honest mistake and bombing. It's not the first time they've done it. And bombing something repeatedly, thinking it was something else. I could see that happening there. I think that's why people, it's not getting as much play because, you know, the one in Afghanistan that was hit with an AC-130, one of the new ones. I mean, this thing, at nighttime, it can see, you know, me hand you a cigarette from like 20,000 feet or something insane, you know.
And what's even worse is the one in Afghanistan. They got on the phone and were making phone calls and like, y'all are bombing us right now. This needs to stop. You know, they 100% knew what they were doing.
Right, and there's actually a system of sign and countersign where the people at the hospital should say, you know, Raven or whatever the word is, and then the people at, you know, the NATO forces should respond with, you know, Blackbird, and then the hospital will say another word, and that's it. That's like verification that they are on the wrong target. There's actually a procedure set up for this, or there was in the early 2000s. And that's a procedure that's been around since World War II. I don't see them scrapping that. So the fact that the attack continued after, you know, they got on the phone and after they verified who they were, and the fact that they have Red Cross blankets or sheets on the tents, that's, you know, the guys in the AC-130, they saw that. There's no way they can say that they didn't. And all of that stuff is recorded. Everything that happens in an AC-130 is recorded. It's a giant cargo plane that basically has cannons sticking out the side of it. And they're obviously not releasing the videos or the audio or anything.
No, I can't imagine they would.
I'm hoping at some point there will be a leak because I'm very curious to see what the gunner saw and what the gunner said and what they told him to keep shooting. Because I have a hard time believing that one of these Air Force pilots or one of the munitions guys was okay with blowing up a hospital. I mean, there had to have been something that came across from command to tell him to keep shooting. Because at some point they had to have seen what they were hitting.
And another, I think, difference between the two different bombings as well, you know, first off, when the United States bombs a hospital, it barely gets, you know, much play in the media. You know, if Saudi Arabia does it, of course it's not going to. But it kind of reminds me of a thought I had about the Star Tribune article. And one of the criticisms was you complain when the United States bombs somebody, but you don't complain when Assad bombs somebody. It's like, well, I'm not paying tax dollars to Assad. I'm paying my tax dollars to the United States government, and they're bombing people for no reason.
Right. I mean, we definitely have to hold our own government more accountable than we try to hold other governments. You know, the theory is that, you know, the United States has the moral authority because we do things the right way. Blowing up a hospital is not typically seen as the right way to do things.
Typically not.
I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but under normal circumstances, that's not something you want to do. That's what, you know, the Geneva Convention, I think the technical term for it is really uncool. So I don't. I think that Americans, you know, we just did it, so we don't want to draw attention to the fact that the Saudis did it with our equipment. You know?
That's it. It was done with American equipment both times. You know, at least it wasn't, you know, the United States pulling the trigger the second time.
Right. I'm pretty sure that the Saudis used F-15s on it, but and if it was a modern version, you know, that would be just completely unexplainable because the optics and everything have improved so much over the years. But from what I understand, they were using ones from like the late 70s, early 80s, which they weren't, you know, they're nowhere near as good. I mean, just think about how much your phone has improved in the last 10 years. The same thing with avionics packages. And so I can cut them a little bit more slack. I mean, it was wrong. What they did was horrible. They should have been more careful. But there's a chance that was a genuine error. When it comes to the U.S., I don't see how that happened. Like, I do not understand.
On the flip side of that, though, too, there is, even though they're not as technologically advanced, I guess, with what they're using in their day-to-day operations, we're still talking about what the fourth highest funded military in the world. I think that's a stat a lot of people don't realize. Is I don't know if they're still fourth. They were for a while, the Saudis. I mean, we're not talking, about some military that has nothing.
Right, and sometimes those stats can be deceptive because 1 year a country can just spend a whole bunch on defense and then they get into that top 10. But the Saudis are always in the top 10. They're normally in the top 5. So they do have they spend a lot of money on the military, but a lot of that is used to suppress their own people because they use their military against their own people constantly. So some of the money goes to that, but at the same time, they also have very different tactics and doctrine. The Saudis do not really care about collateral damage because they've got oil and the world gives them a pass for pretty much anything.
Yeah, Yemen's been an example of that. I mean, the civilian casualties in Yemen have just been jaw-dropping.
Right, and the best is, the messed up part about that is, the Saudis thought this was going to be a cakewalk. They really did. And then, they met the Houthi rebels, and these guys make Palestinians look soft. I mean, I watched a video where 6 of them fought the tank with rocks, and they actually took the tank.
Wow.
Yeah, they're climbing up on the top, and they finally beat the hinges out, and they take the thing off, they jerk the guys out, and they actually capture the tank, and they didn't have any weapons.
See, I've kind of got it in my own theory of it is because there was the propaganda here in the States right when the war started, and I feel like the Saudis wanted to get the United States engaged in Yemen, like they've gotten the United States engaged in a whole bunch of countries, and for whatever reason, Obama didn't go through with it. So for once, they're actually having to fight their own battle.
Well, when I was looking at it, I was kind of seeing that basically it looked like our administration had given them the nod to annex and to literally just take Yemen. That's what it looked like to me. And I was like, wow, that's messed up. And then, they ran into these guys, and it's not quite as easy as they thought it was going to be.
It certainly has to appear to be.
The Saudis winning. I don't see the Saudis winning, to be honest. I think they'll eventually have to pull out.
Well, I'll tell you, speaking of the hospitals, have you heard the story about the State Department coming out and blaming or accusing, should I say, Russia of hitting hospitals and causing collateral damage in Syria? John Kirby, spokesperson for the State Department, when asked about it, his answer was basically, well, there were some media reports and there's some intelligence reports. But he didn't give anything specific, like no actual facts on this information. And the irony, again, is the United States literally just bombed a hospital this month. And, they're pointing their finger at Russia for doing the same thing and not providing any evidence of them doing it. They're just saying they are doing it.
Right. And there probably is some truth to that. I mean, because the way I understand the State Department's allegations are that they've hit hospitals along the way, and the way the Russians work, then they very well might have. But I can promise you, the hospital didn't call them and tell them to stop.
Mm-hmm.
They might have hit a hospital by accident, but they didn't intentionally bomb one and continue to do it for an hour or so. So again, yeah.
Do you think this is the State Department just trying to deflect things away from them?
Absolutely. Had we not just bombed the hospital, we wouldn't have brought this up, because I don't think I've seen nothing from Human Rights Watch, from Amnesty International, from any organization or any medical group that would, in theory, be running these hospitals, claiming that they came under direct attack. You know, maybe shrapnel hit somebody or something like that from an explosion nearby, but I haven't seen really anything, giving any specifics about any real attack coming from the people that were supposed to have been attacked.
And that's something we didn't like. That's the complete reverse of what we saw with the Doctors Without Borders. I mean, this week, the Yemen, they were tweeting about it. Like, we're getting bombed right now.
Yeah, no. If you bomb an NGO, you know, they're gonna make some noise. They're gonna be mad. You know, again, it's not cool. It's not something we should be doing. And I haven't seen that coming out of Syria. The only exception, I think, would be the civil defense force that what's his name put together, the guy that's got his thumb in Ukraine, Soros. He funded one, and I think they claim that they've gotten hit. But again, you know, no specifics. And these guys are PR geniuses. They always have cameras, and we've got no film. We've got nothing. You know, so I'm not really buying that either. But well, we'll see. Maybe it will develop over the weekend.
I'm curious to see what happens with all this. Did you change the topic here a little bit? I'm sure I know the answer to this, but did you get a chance to watch any of the theater which took place last night on CNBC? And
no, I didn't.
Yeah, it was an absolute train wreck. It was unbelievable. Yeah, there were a couple of moments in the debate that it's just you kind of just put your head down and like, what's going on here? When I'm agreeing with Jeb Bush about something, there's a huge problem. Something has gone awry somewhere. But you know, they were talking about the moderators and how horrible they were, and that was just, I mean, it feels like corporate media is on its last legs, and they were grasping at straws last night to make themselves relevant. Jeb Bush, though, made a comment. He started attacking Marco Rubio, who, to me, they're basically the same person, about his attendance record, though. And to me, the whole attendance record with Marco Rubio is hilarious. Because this guy's missed like 70-something, almost 80 votes. And his excuse is, well, I've been running for president. It's okay, I've missed those votes. But Bernie Sanders, who, you know, not a big fan of, but he's missed 9 votes. Rand Paul's missed like 4 votes. You know, and me and Nick talk about it all the time. We think Rubio may be the guy. We think he's the one that's been hand-selected. Hope I'm wrong. Hope Nick's wrong. But we will see. We will definitely see on that, but yeah, my head almost exploded when I agreed with Jeb Bush about something. I still am kind of have chills over that.
Just remember, even a broken clock is right twice.
I actually said that statement about 3 times last night. So have you heard about James Clapper coming out and talking about Putin in Syria, and he's just winging everything that's going on over there? This is the same James Clapper who lied under oath to Congress, a week before Snowden came out?
Right.
And so, you know, this guy is a known liar that should be in jail. Somehow he still has a job, and we're accepting his expertise on the situation in Syria. So your view of Mr. Clapper's statements that Putin is just, you know, he's figuring that out on the fly as he goes over there.
Yeah, no. Clapper, you know, yeah, he was director of the NSA, but, you know, Putin was a real spy. You know, Putin actually did intelligence work. Putin is not a guy that gambles. I mean, he never has.
And think about, this is something that was crazy. I mean, think about how long it took for Russia to get engaged in Syria. I mean, it wasn't like it was a decision he made overnight. But that's how Clapper's kind of portraying it.
No, he waited for the perfect time. I mean, Putin, is that Putin's military and strategic prowess is beyond anything that we have in the United States at the national level as far as politicians go. He lacks a lot domestically, and he's actually done a little bit of statesmanship, which has impressed me as far as getting Assad to stop the barrel bombings and stuff like that. That shows real leadership. But,
and for me, the one thing I'll say for Putin is he is a PR master.
yeah.
He definitely seems to, he can sway the public opinion. I think, we talk about it all the time, but, the chess game with Snowden, that's PR genius. He'll suppress stuff in his country, but when he has the opportunity to jump on something international like that, he jumps right on it. He's extremely calculated, I think, in everything that he does.
Right. I mean, there's an old Navy saying that, during the Cold War, they'd run into each other out there on the ships and everything, and submarines, and it became very common for American commanders to relax and just let the Russians do what they were going to do, because they knew, if we weren't on the brink of something, because they knew, quote, the Russians don't take a crap without a plan. So they would just let them run it and shadow them, and when the exercise was over, everybody would go back to their neutral corners. But they never tried to engage them because Russians are very calculated. That they have their military is very advanced when it comes to doctrine and strategy. That what they lack in technology, they make up for in planning. Clapper is wrong. I mean, he's flat wrong. I'm very interested to see, now that we do have one intelligence agency that's completely just broken away from the administration and just said, no, we're just going to start, telling the American people what we really think. I'm very interested to see what DIA is going to come out and say. Because the last couple of times, the CIA or the NSA or the National Intelligence Advisor has come out and said something that was flat out wrong, you had a DIA spokesman within 24 to 72 hours come out and say, well, no, see, this is really what's happening. And I'm waiting for that. I keep looking for the press release on it.
I want to read one of the actual quotes from Clapper. He was talking to CNN of all people. I personally question whether Putin has some long-term strategy or whether he is being very opportunistic on a day-to-day basis. And I think his intervention into Syria is another manifestation of that. What his long-term plan is, well, I'm not sure he has one. I think he's kind of winging this day-to-day. That is not the Vladimir Putin that I know. Right, wrong, whatever. He does have a plan.
Oh, absolutely. His plan is pretty simple. He's going to protect Assad. He's going to try to, get Iran firmly back into Russia's control. He's going to attempt to recognize Kurdistan, and he's even made some gestures towards recognizing an independent Palestine. He's setting himself up in the Middle East. If the director, then, if Clapper doesn't see this, that explains why we have this runaway intelligence budget and we never know what's going on in the world.
Well, clearly, I would think Clapper knows what's going on. This is a man that is a known liar. So, I would be of the belief that he's just out there saying some nonsense, but it's not anything he really believes.
I don't know. I think that since the fall of the Cold War, or since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, U.S. intelligence, we haven't done a lot of human intelligence. We haven't done a lot of real spying. We haven't, we've relied on satellites and signals interception. Intelligence work is all about determining intent. That's its whole purpose, is to figure out what the other guy's going to do. If you boil everything down, that's what it's about. And I think that U.S. intelligence, save a few, and they're the smallest agencies, a few small agencies within the intelligence community have completely forgotten that. They're so used to being masters of the universe, since 1991, that they're off their game. And Clapper came up during this period of we can do whatever we want, and nobody can touch us. We're not like that anymore. We do have real rivals, and we do have real threats. And it's to their end game, but I don't think that they see them. I think that if they did and they understood what was going on, I think they would be the first ones to recognize Kurdistan, because that's going to happen. I mean, we even had a U.S. task force admit that was what needed to happen to stabilize the region, but we didn't recognize it.
Now, why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Because we need them to continue fighting in Syria to destabilize Assad. It's very pragmatic. The second Assad is destabilized, we would recognize it. And northern Iraq and northeastern Syria would become its own little country. And it would be, Kurdistan. If Putin makes that move before we do, which I see as, I think the only reason he's not is that he's hoping that if they go in, he can keep Syria intact. He's hoping that his little plan there will keep Syria intact, and then he can recognize northern Iraq, just northern Iraq, as Kurdistan, which gives the U.S. a huge black eye. And
then he would leave Syria as is.
Right. So he goes in and intervenes in a country, and it stays whole. The U.S. goes in and intervenes in Iraq, and a few years later, it's no longer even a country. That's his end game.
Sounds like he's winging it to me.
Yeah.
So, what do you see actually on the ground, militarily, the U.S.'s plan right now to deal with Syria? Because we were dealing with a point that it appeared that, Assad's days were numbered. We had Obama coming out, and now things look completely different. They're acting like, well, maybe we can make this work. We'll see what we can do. Obviously, the more Putin has put his foot down in the region, they've backed up, and it seems like the propaganda is now steering more towards the Russian side of things as opposed to the Syrian side of things. You're not hearing, the barrel bombs and Assad this and Assad that as much as you are hearing, well, Russia's just over there doing all this stuff. How dare they?
Right. I think that the U.S. is probably, the plan, if it was me, I would pretend to play along with the political process. If I'm the U.S., string pullers, I'd play along with the political process while trying to organize the rebel factions and try to stage something similar to the Tet offensives during Vietnam, where you hit a whole bunch of cities all at once and hope that can overpower them and basically give it one last shot. And if that doesn't work, then you're going to go, oh, those crazy rebels, we were sitting here committed to the peace process. Okay, let's just go ahead with this plan. Let's keep Assad in power. But I don't see them giving up. I do see one last big push, and I would expect to see it in the next 60 to 90 days. Because they're going to have to get those assets in place, and now they're having to do it while dodging Russian bombers.
Do you see any scenario where the U.S. walks away?
If they try for this push and it doesn't work, yeah, I think that's going to be their only option. Short of actually invading.
Now, the curveball to this, though, is we're almost a year away from which, I believe will be a Republican president, and the majority of the Republicans are saying we need to go in there and put boots on the ground and invade. Do you think because that military, that's that's enough time for Putin to give some stability to Assad. Do you believe if a Republican gets in office, then we will then turn around after that and go, we're going back?
I don't think so, not in the immediate. I mean, I think we'll definitely try for Syria again at some point in the future, but I don't see it within the next administration. Simply because no matter what they say during the campaign, they're going to have to deal with the reality on the ground. And marching U.S. troops into that, it won't end well. And you don't see the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Army or the Marine Corps. You don't see any of these generals cheering this on because they know that this is going to be bad. I mean, this is going to make Iraq look like Disneyland. You've got way too many factions. Nobody's a real ally except for the Kurds, and now they're cozying up to Russia. And all these other people are bought, and they will turn on the U.S. as soon as they have a chance. So I don't see, if they do it, it would be against the advice of the Joint Chiefs. I don't see that as a very realistic possibility. Any military strategist would look at it and go, this isn't going to work. There's short of a full scale, like if we actually invaded at this point, and I'm not somebody to say this would be the start of World War III. We really would. We would trigger a response from the Russians, a response from the Iranians. We would really set a lot of stuff in motion, and Iran would probably call on China. I mean, it would be that spider web that started World War I, where this little baby country that really doesn't have that much power on its own, but it has powerful friends. And I think that's the scenario that would play out. I don't think the Joint Chiefs would want to do that. They know they can't win. And nobody wants to go to war when you can't win.
I mean, and we're talking about Syria, who are allies with Russia, who are there now, and we've been in Afghanistan for 14 years and can't even supposedly win whatever war that is. I don't see it ending well if we invaded Syria.
No, well,
I believe there are people out there, though, that is their end goal. I think, they want to see Iran taken out. And they know they have to take care of Syria before they can even dream of that.
Right. And if they, and that's another reason why Kurdistan becomes so important. Because there is, we always hear about the Kurdistan in Turkey. We hear about the Kurdistan in Syria. We hear about the Kurdistan in Iraq. What you don't hear about is there's a large population of Kurds in Iran. And once Kurdistan is established, that's what could be used as the flashpoint and the justification for going after Iran. I mean, we would have a ready justification for it.
So they could use Kurdistan strategically to push into Iran.
Right, because up in the northwestern corner of Iran, the mountains there, it's almost exclusively Kurds. The Iranians are smart enough, because the Kurds, just historically, they will fight to kill their hamburger. The Iranians are smart enough to leave them alone. They really do. They give them a great deal of autonomy. For Iran, but I think that if a Kurdistan, Republic of Kurdistan, whatever, was established and it was a U.S. ally, I think, of course, something would immediately happen that would give that would push the Kurds to want to free their ethnic brothers, and the U.S. to help them. And they're a fledgling nation and they need our help. And I think it'd be an easy sell to the American people.
Do you think the United States would go through with that if they haven't taken out Syria first?
Maybe. It becomes a whole lot less likely, because if they haven't dealt with Syria, if Kurdistan exists, then there's still a much larger chunk of Kurds in Syria. And they could use those Kurds to reignite that fight whenever they wanted. And I do think they'd wait a few years before trying it again.
Because, Syria is definitely the next domino, it feels like. And, the end game, I believe the end game is Iran. It's just how they're going to weasel their way into it.
Right. I mean, we definitely, the U.S., the West, wants Iran under its thumb. And once they can do that, that they can, the Middle East at that point is, because Saudi Arabia is already more or less pacified. We've come to some kind of, working agreement with them, and they control the Sunnis. If we can get Iran, then Iran will control the Shia, and that will stabilize the Middle East greatly. But I don't taking Iran again. That's that's not going to be an easy task. These things that they want to do, and I'm with you. I do believe they want to do them. I think that it doesn't. We're looking for justifications for a war rather than, needing to go. I think that we have set our sights a little too high in too short of a time period.
I believe they thought this was going to be much easier than it has turned out to be. I'm under the impression they thought they would just go over there. See, I have two thoughts on it. Part of me feels like they would just go over there and it would just be easy, and they would just run through these countries and everything would be the way they want it. And then there's another part of me, especially when you look at Afghanistan, it's like, well, really even Syria now is you go over there and just, twiddle your thumbs for a bunch of years, and, well, we're here, keep spending money in war, and there's really no exit strategy, there's no end game, there's just, we're here. This is what we do now. We occupy these areas.
It's the standard problem with the West and the Middle East. Most Westerners, to include military strategists that are working in the Pentagon, do not understand the Middle East. They don't, they see a country, when in reality, it's not a country. It's a bunch of tribes. Afghanistan, the idea that they were going to turn that into some kind of unity government with a central government, even though it has never really had one, like in all of history. I mean, it was laughable from the start. But that just boils down to not understanding the Middle East. I think that they did think it was going to be easy. And I think they thought Iraq was going to be easy. But they didn't understand that it's not. Yeah, we can defeat just about any military in the world, because we have the air power. But at the end of the day, somebody has to go in there on foot and take it and hold the land. And, there aren't a lot of militaries that are more practiced on the ground than those in the Middle East. These guys, they know how to fight. And they have this maze of ethnic loyalties and religious loyalties, and we don't understand them in the West. And there's so many different groups. I mean, in the run-up to the Iraq War, we talked about Iraqis. And then once we got in there, we realized we weren't dealing with Iraqis. We were dealing with Shia and Sunni and Kurds and Yazidi and all of these different ethnic groups. It's not unified because we drew the borders and we didn't understand them when we drew them. So that's the problem the U.S. is always going to face in the Middle East, is that the realities on the ground, the loyalties on the ground, typically aren't to a central government, which is foreign to us.
Do you believe that the United States, I don't know if it's specifically their agenda, maybe it is, but they would be happy once things in the Middle East maybe turned into more of governed like Saudi Arabia, where there's this iron fist over the people, they are in charge, period, dictatorship, do what we want. And
if that dictator was controllable, that's exactly what they would want. That's what we have in Iran. We overthrew their government and put somebody in Iran, and then he got overthrown in '79. And that guy, there was a reason he got overthrown. I mean, he was horrible, but we dealt with him. And we've got a long history of doing that. We don't care if they're dictators. We don't care what their human rights record is, as long as they engage in our corporate interests. And that's, it's sad, it's horrible, but it's the truth. That's never been.
That's definitely what you see. We saw it with Iran. We wonder why all these Iranians, and again, you can't have this conversation with many people without them saying, oh, you're sympathetic to Iran. No, but at the same time, we installed the Shah, which was his dictator, which was horrible. And of course they would want to get rid of him. And of course they would have plenty of reason. They know how he got there. And they would have plenty of reason to hate the United States because of that.
Oh, yeah. That's why anytime you look, and it's just a perfect little micro example of how American propaganda works, and we don't even realize it's propaganda. Next time you see a special on Iran, go ahead and see when it starts, when they start looking at the history of Iran. Guarantee you it's in 1979. They're not going to talk about, and they may talk about the Shah, but they're not going to talk about how we got to power, which is
the CIA.
Yeah. The CIA and MI5, they were like, you know what? We need that oil. We need these contracts. Let's go ahead and get rid of this guy and put in our own. And, it sounds like something out of some James Bond movie or conspiracy theory, whatever, but it's Ajax was the project name. You can look it up. It existed. They've admitted it. But it's not. It's almost never talked about in the media, and it's one of those just glaring omissions that just always cracks me up.
And it's so bizarre too how they report some of this stuff. Like the Libya Gaddafi stuff really amazed me because when Gaddafi was finally killed, they talk about. At the time, it was, these guys, they got out of control, and they got mad, They got on Facebook, got mad, and killed him. Whatever. And then now, all these politicians are, taking credit for it. Yeah, we were involved. It's like, wait, back then, you weren't involved at all. And now you're like, yeah, we did that. Same thing with Iran, and same thing with Libya.
Right, and that's one of those things that, and it goes back to what I was talking about with, the intelligence world and how it's changed. The whole idea of the intelligence world is that our failures are known, our successes are not. And for people to be talking about an operation that actually went correctly for a change, it blows the mind of anybody that has ever studied this, because you never admit it. If it went well, you destroy any evidence that it was you. But now we've become so accustomed to being untouchable that, we've become arrogant. And we believe that, we can say, yeah, we overthrew that country, and what? Well, actually, you just admitted to a violation of international law, a big one. And these things could eventually they will pile up. And
but so far there have been no repercussions, so they just keep going for it.
Right. But eventually there will be repercussions. Even our closest allies will have to take a step back they'll all have to do what Canada is doing.
If Corbyn gets, if Corbyn becomes prime minister, that'll happen overnight.
Yeah.
I mean, the UK will step away overnight if Corbyn ever does become prime minister.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And that's and that's the thing is we in the U.S. I don't think our military or our political, elite have realized this, that even our allies are stepping away. And, the UK and Canada and even Australia now is starting to show signs of backing up. And the Australians have always done that. I mean, they went to Vietnam with us. Nobody else did that. So there's definitely a dark cloud on the horizon, and there's going to be a reality check for the intelligence community and for the string pullers that are trying to get all of this done, because we aren't the only bully on the block anymore. China and Russia are setting up their version of a World Bank and International Monetary Fund, and that's always been since the 40s.
And some news that came out today, real quick. China has ended its one-child policy, so they're gonna bone up the military again. Yeah, and that's probably a lot of what it has to do with, and they're experiencing a little bit more prosperity, and they know that war is coming because they have these new banks, and they're going to be able to colonize without colonizing the same way we have since the end of World War II. And that's a huge threat to U.S. interests. Yet we have no idea what to do about it because our intelligence community has lost their mind. The thing that I think the horizon is definitely more bleak for the United States, I believe, is because, you have Canada and they have a new government. You have Australia stepping away. You have the UK with the possibility of we all know Cameron's going to go along with whatever. But if they at least have the possibility of Corbyn getting in and pulling troops and doing more of the right thing foreign policy-wise, we don't have that so much here. We don't have that politician that, could get in office and do it. A lot of people are under the impression Bernie Sanders is that guy. Why they think that, I do not know. He supported Obama staying in Afghanistan. I mean, he's like, I'm against war, I'm against this, but we should definitely do that, and we should do that, and we should do that. We don't have that figure that I see that could actually be in power that would pull the trigger on doing the right thing. Of course, we had, Ron Paul 4 years ago, but, he wasn't ever going to be the president.
Yeah, well, we don't have ideologues in the United States running for office anymore. We really don't. We don't have ideologically motivated people. And if they do run, they get there and they start getting the campaign contributions, and they become less ideological. And when it comes to money, everybody's with the same theology. You want more of it. And I think our campaign system is so corrupt, and NBC is so corrupt, that even if we get that 1 in a million shot, and we get somebody in power, they'll be bought. I mean, everybody has a price,
Unfortunately, we saw it with Obama. He had good rhetoric, and look what happened. But I tell you what, we are out of time for tonight. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining us this evening. Everybody check out the Fifth Column News, Anti-Media Radio. Join us next week. This is SM Gibson. Anti-Media out.
I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo.